Howdy, howdy. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. We're here today with Kyle Ruddy. He is Kyle Ruddy and Kyle Ruddy's beard. Is that still a thing?
It might be. It might still be a thing. I'm sure if it's listening, it'll chime in and let us know.
So I'm not seeing it shared though your screen or you or me. So Eric, are you doing something? Let me see. Because it should be doing, okay, I see me and you now.
There it goes.
And yep, and I think you're, yeah, so we're over to the side there.
We're getting fancy there.
Okay. So I guess it's fixed. Yeah, Eric said he fixed it. So we should be live on Facebook and the Twitters and also live streaming to YouTube. So welcome, folks. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for being here. And I'm going to let Kyle go ahead and introduce himself and the beard. Thank you, Kyle.
All righty. Thank you, Wences, for the intro. So as Winston mentioned, my name is Kyle Ruddy. I do work for HashiCorp, so I will throw out that caveat that, this is a HashiCorp user group, but, in this case, I also do work for HashiCorp. I lead our technical product marketing program there. And one of the fantastic products that I get to focus in on is Terraform. And so when they reached out to me, when your organizers reached out to me, it was one of those things of like, what's a really good topic? And generally, there's never a shortage of news when it comes to Terraform. So I thought that would be a really great time to kind of take a look back over the last, couple months. And even, there was actually a release this week for one of the Terraform items that we'll be covering in this session. So let's go ahead and dive right in. All right, so a little bit about the agenda. Terraform 1.4 is the latest and greatest release. It came out a couple weeks ago. And then we're also going to dive into our cloud development kit for Terraform, or CDKTF. And then we're going to wrap up with some updates around Terraform Cloud and then run into some demos, which I see that I left off of the agenda, but do not worry, we will have demos. All right, so Terraform 1.4. This is probably the one that you know and love the most. This was released back on March 8th. It probably wasn't as big of a release as a lot of people had been expecting, but it is important for several different reasons. The first of which is we have gone through and added in a new native resource built into Terraform itself, into the underlying language that can now take place of the null resource. This is going by the name of Terraform Data. Now, the important part here when it comes to talking about this is the null resource can kind of do a lot of different things, but the key there is that it actually depends on an external provider. So you have to reach out to the Terraform registry, grab down the null provider, and then it imports it into your code. Well, in this case, with the Terraform data resource, you no longer have to do that. You don't have that external requirement anymore. You don't have to worry about managing a null provider. You don't have to do any of those things, and you still get all of the goodness and the tricky workarounds that you do with the null provider or the null resource. Then we have a couple other things. These are much more important when it comes to using Terraform from the command line into Terraform Cloud as either your remote state management or even just running those remote operations. And so what we have here is kind of a better way to summarize and visualize what's happening within a Terraform run. So historically, you would see the JSON-based output within Terraform Cloud, very similar to what you saw on the CLI side. However, Terraform Cloud has introduced a much more graphically friendly representation of what's happening. So here on the right-hand side, you can see that, oh, we're deploying a Azure RM Linux virtual machine. We see the little Azure symbol that's right there next to it. We can see some of the Terraform symbols down there below for things like the null resource and the random integer. So, it's a little more friendly, more user-friendly when it comes to consuming this from the Terraform Cloud side. And then another big important one was something that was introduced into Terraform Cloud, which we'll get into later. But this is a way for you to use and interact with Terraform and have OPA interrogate your Terraform plan output. So you can do this directly from the CLI with that hook back to Terraform Cloud so that you have that information, that's the contextual information that's right there within your command line driven workflow. That's another big improvement because historically before 1.4, this was something that was skipped over in your command line view, but it was still running and available on the Terraform Cloud side. There are a couple other enhancements that are notable. First and foremost, around the kind of masking the inputs for those sensitive variables. This is something that's been gaining a lot more features and functionality when it comes to kind of protecting different items or information that's within Terraform. In this case, inputs for those variables that are marked as sensitive, being a little more selective, being a little more user-friendly when it comes to interacting with Terraform workspaces using the select command. So that now it can also just go ahead and create a workspace instead of prompting you to go through that process. That's especially helpful for those automated workflows that you might be running within your different environments. Terraform plan has been updated to continue to store the state file even if a plan fails, just so that you have that historical context instead of it being just scrubbed and deleted, so that you have something to go back to. Checksum enhancements for Terraform init, and then a new command that's going to be important for our next section around Terraform metadata functions, just being able to generate JSON so that it's a little more friendly when it comes to interacting with some of those other items, machine readable integrations. All right, so that was a quick look at Terraform 1.4. We're going to get into some demos on those things here in just a second, but we're going to wrap up with the slides before jumping into the demos. Next up is the Cloud Development Kit for Terraform. This has undergone a lot of changes over the past, I'll go ahead and say, year. This is probably something that you might be more familiar with as CDKTF. In this case, the big major highlight that I would be remiss if I didn't at least mention is the 0.12 release that happened back in August. This was the first GA release for the CDKTF project that added full support for TypeScript, Python, C#, Java, and Go. This was really important for those end users, the practitioners, developers who, instead of using HCL, are a little more familiar on the programming language side, because this gives them another option in terms of still being able to consume that underlying Terraform engine without having to, context switch in between different languages. Then some of the latest and greatest improvements here, just looking at it from this year. January 17th, we released 0.15. This was pretty important because we made significant improvement to a couple of the different commands, including the diff command, apply, and destroy commands. And this is mainly around the way that the underlying system functioned, so that it was actually using the Terraform CLI for the different processes instead of the API calls. So you had a much more familiar workflow when it came to trying to troubleshoot things or interact with different things that kind of goes along that Terraform workflow. It supports the full output for policy evaluations and run tasks. This is one of those things that I caveat. That's a Terraform Cloud or Terraform Enterprise as a requirement for those policy integrations and run task integrations. And then it also gets to the point of doing automatic workspace creation. So if you think about one of the updates that I just mentioned around Terraform 1.4, you can see some of those things that are already coming through from the Terraform side into the CDKTF project. Then on the bottom line, one of the hugest benefits, at least from my side, is around some of the improvements to the CDKTF convert command. So what this convert command allows you to do is allows you to write out all of your and define all of your infrastructure as code in your programming languages of your choice. And then you can use this convert command and it'll actually convert it all over to HCL. So this is really important for, especially if you're creating code or you're creating infrastructure and then you're handing it off to, say, like an SRE team or pick your operations team, all of a sudden you don't have to worry about them needing to know and understand a programming language. They can go right into the HCL side of things. And this is one of those updates that came due to 1.4's improvement to the metadata functions. So this is, being able to take that, create the files using the JSON functionality and then shipping it off and converting it over to HCL. All right, then we're going to jump into our what's new for the Terraform cloud side. One of the big things that we announced last year that has continued to gain traction and has been continuing to be improved and updated over the last several months is around continuous validation. This is kind of the notion that you can create what's known as condition blocks. These were something that was introduced in Terraform 1.3. And then you allow Terraform Cloud, in this case, which is running remote operations on your behalf, it can check into those condition blocks to say, hey, has your certificate expired, or is your vault key expired, or in this case, in a demo that I'll show later, hey, is your size or is your disk size for a certain virtual machine, is it still the appropriate size? Just so that you kind of have an understanding of what's going on within your environment, and you can kind of call some of those items out ahead of time without having to either dig in a more imperative fashion, or diving into one of the cloud portals or your on-premises portals and start poking around. I do caveat this. This is again one of those things. This is still available in beta, so just be aware of that. Then we have some updates to the way that Terraform, and specifically through Terraform Cloud, how it interacts with certain credentials. So what we've done on the Terraform Cloud side is being able to use a component that enables the, in this case, OIDC authentication, OIDC-based authentication into the Terraform Cloud workflow itself. So instead of having to provide static credentials, instead of having to, fill out the variables, which I'll show you kind of how that looks here in just a second, but instead of having to populate all of those things and perhaps share those in mechanisms that you might not otherwise do, you now have the ability to do it in a just-in-time fashion. And currently right now, the Vault, AWS, Azure, and GCP providers are the ones that are supported. I'll show you a demo on how this one operates because it's really cool. Then, kind of mentioned this earlier, native support for Open Policy Agent. This is being added into as a first-class integration, so it's right there directly in your workflow for how you run, plan, and then go through the policy checks. Just like if you've used Terraform Cloud, there's Sentinel. That's our own policy as code engine, but now you can also integrate in any OPA policies that you may or may not have. And it works in exactly the same functionality. You can still see, the output from how those policies operated, and you can still use the remediation methods that you might already have in place. Then we get into no-code provisioning. This is something that was, again, released as a beta a little while ago, but the important piece for no-code provisioning is that it's really cool because you can establish modules that don't actually need to be referenced in code, like as the name of the feature kind of describes. You can create your module, make it available in your private module registry. And then from that point, you see the visualization that we have here, where you can all of a sudden just click on Provision Workspace, and it'll guide you through the entire process. So, define some variables and then click Go, and it'll actually go ahead and deploy all of those defined resources for you within your environment. So really cool. Don't need any sort of Git-based access. You don't need access to hopefully any cloud services because that's built into to the module. And really, it's just single-click type functionality without having to write any code whatsoever. All right, then I have one more big thing before we jump into. Actually, no, let's not do the one big thing first. Let's do the demo. I've already ruined the one big thing, but we'll get back to that later. You'll definitely want to stick around for that. Okay, so here is what we have, just a fairly basic environment that goes through and deploys some resources. I should have already deployed this, but I did not, so give me 1 second. There we go. All right, so with that going, let me show you what we're working with here. The important part for this first demo is that we can see that we're working with the null provider. We've defined it here as part of our required providers. We've also defined it down here within the provider block itself. We're using a couple different modules in order to create the resources that are out there in our Azure environment. In this case, I believe it's in our main TF file. Nope. It's in our web config over here. So what we have right here is just a null resource. This is doing nothing more than connecting into our deployed virtual machine, and it's going to send it some files that we've made available locally. Probably not the best way to go about doing this, but this is also one of those times where you see some of the magic behind the scenes, and it happens to work for this particular environment. All right, so there we can see the output of the plan. And now it's rolling through and starting to create stuff. Generally doesn't take too long. Let's see. If we jump into our Terraform Cloud environment, we can see that we now have a run that's out there being performed. It's running through the apply process. We can see some of the updates thanks to Terraform 1.4. Which we can verify the version that's right there. We can see the output, the more visually pleasing output on our screen. Yet, if we jump back to Visual Studio Code, we can see the CLI-based output that we've all grown familiar with over the past, well, basically decade. All right, so while that's still going, let's take a look at our resource groups. So here's what it's creating that's out there. We're using Azure for this particular demo. It's creating a NIC, an IP, a disk, some networks, and then a virtual machine. And then should almost be done. While we're waiting on that to finish up, we can already skip over to our next branch here, where we're actually going to switch over to use Terraform data. So if we notice there, it was a very quick change, at least for this resource block, because it's literally nothing than going from null resource to Terraform data. But in our root modules, main.tf, we can see that the null provider is no longer established or needed. We can get rid of our provider block that was down there below. So it makes it a little bit cleaner, makes it a little bit easier to maintain, and that's just one less thing that we have to grab down. So once this is done, we'll be able to run our new apply. The joys of live demos. Okay, there we go. So we have some real life items that are out there living in Azure. In this case, the virtual machine doesn't actually have anything that's running underneath it, so there's nothing really to connect to out there. So we're going to clear that, and then we're going to hit a Terraform apply so that we can see kind of the difference in between our null resource and the Terraform data resource. This shouldn't take too long at all. You know, this is one of those areas where it's just one less thing that it has to initialize during the process there. All right, so there it's checked our existing infrastructure, and then it's seeing that some things have changed. In this case, it's detecting some drift. This is kind of just a product of how Azure operates, but we're going to go ahead and fix that when we fix our null resource conversion over here. It does change it, so it does go from the null resource over to the Terraform data resource. This is something that we could also use a moved block for. We could, add in the move block, move the resource from the null resource over to the Terraform data resource. That is something that I will probably add for the next time, but for the sake of this demo, we're skipping it. All right, so we're going to tell it, we're going to tell it to go ahead, perform those actions, update our null resource. You can see that it's destroying it and it's recreating it as a Terraform data resource. It's probably also going to be fixing those different the drift that it found in our network security region. And there we go, all set there. All right, so with that, we're going to move on to our next demo here. So now we're going to take a look at workspace health. This is part of the drift detection functionality and continuous validation functionality. So in this case, we're going to jump back to our web app, our modules configuration down here. So this is what I was talking about before, where we have a condition block that now lives underneath the lifecycle block that actually lives in our virtual machine definition that's right here. So all this is doing is saying, hey, we're looking at our operating system disk, and we're checking whether or not the disk size in gigabytes is more than 20 gigabyte. If you've deployed some of the virtual machines out there, you know that your mileage may vary. And in this case, generally I would use Packer to automatically build my images and then deploy it, but that's an extra step that we didn't go through just because of the main core focus of these demos. But the other important part here is that we can also provide error messages so you have some sort of context in the way things are kind of going on. All right, let's clear my screen here. Let's run through our Terraform apply, auto approve, let that rip. And then we're going to go do some things that you shouldn't do in your own environments, just so that we can kind of show how this feature and this functionality really works. All right, so since that's taking just a second, let's jump back into here, take a look at our virtual machine. And from there, we're going to look at our networking. So one of the things that it's spun up here is an SSH rule that opens this particular virtual machine up to any. It's generally a bad practice. Even Azure is like, hey, don't do this. This is a bad idea. So what we're going to do is actually delete this rule. All right, so our apply has wrapped up there. Let's go ahead and just delete this, make it disappear. However, the one thing that I should note is that, it's part of our Terraform configuration. It was defined that way. It's desired to be there. It's the intended action of our configuration file is that it exists there. So come on, there we go. So verified SSH rule gone. So now what we're going to do is jump into our workspace here. We can see that it ran just a couple seconds ago, and we have this area that's over here off to the right-hand side called Health. This is all about the workspace health itself, and what we can do there is enable health assessments. And these are those items that I was kind of referencing before, including drift detection and continuous validation. So we're going to go ahead and enable those. And when we jump back out to our workspace, we're going to see a new area that's over here called Health. And so there we see drift for drift detection, and then continuous validation along with the beta tag. Now, one of the new improvements that's come around in here is that you can actually go ahead and kick off a health assessment directly from the UI. Historically, when drift detection GA'd, this was something that, the first time you initialize it, it kicked off in about 5 minutes. But now you can, it kicked off in about 5 minutes, and then it was kind of a 24-hour type deal, where now you can actually do this from a button that's right there and available in the UI. Now it's going to do the health assessment for both drift detection as well as continuous validation. Now, assuming that our live demo is working in the appropriate way, what we're going to see is that we're going to have one item that has drifted, and then, oh, there we go. Okay, there we go. We were just in a weird little area where our screen wasn't in the appropriate place. All right, so here now we notice that our health assessment area has changed. It's been updated. It shows us that we actually have 2 resources that have drifted. So yay, live demos, that's a surprise. But we have 12 items that have not. And then we also have our check. So that was looking at that post condition to verify what the size of our disk was. So if we jump back into health over here, we see our drift here. So we'll click on the one that's expected first. So in this case, it sees that there's a security rule that's out there for SSH and that it no longer exists now. It's red, it's gone. This is drift. Somebody probably did this manually, and that is not a good thing. So it looks like, oh, it caught it twice because of the way that I defined it. Thank you, Azure, for pointing out my inappropriate configuration definitions and that I looped it in underneath the security group as a security rule instead of tossing it outside as an appropriate security rule definition. So thank you, Azure, for the added slight embarrassment there. So we'll fix that here in just a second because, as part of this, we also know that we can either, accept these new settings by, starting a new run, or rather doing a refresh only run, or we overwrite it and return it back to what it's supposed to do with just a brand new run itself. However, the other thing that I want to take a look at here is our continuous validation area. So here we can see that, if there's a failed validation, we see that. We have past, we have unknowns, and then we have just the big bulk of all of it. So in this case, because our virtual machine, I believe it was using a 30 gigabyte disk by default, so we just pass it automatically. In the case where this had actually failed, we would see our error message underneath the message block, so that we would have a really good idea of not only did our condition fail, but also what the error message actually kind of correlates back to. All right, so in this case, let's go ahead and start a new run. We'll do it directly from the UI. So we'll let that rip here for a second. So now what we're going to do is we're going to jump into our next demo, which is around credentials. So this is the dynamic credentials that I was referring to in the deck earlier. So there's a little bit of setup when it comes to this. Each of the different services are a little different. However, we do have really great write-ups and tutorials on how to do some of these things. So for this one in particular, what we're doing is going through, we're interacting with Azure, and we're going to create an Azure AD application. So we're going to call it Ruddy TFC Web App. We're creating a service principal. We're created an identity credential. two identity credentials actually, and then creating our role assignment down here at the bottom. So these are all things that allows Terraform Cloud to interact with Azure and specifically Azure AD to say, hey, you are trusted, you can run these operations. And in this case, we can do, the way that these work out is that it actually looks at the run phase itself. So in this case, it allows this credential to be used during the plan and then also the apply phase. So since Terraform Cloud is still probably churning on that, we'll clear this out. We'll change over to our credential, nope, not that one, to our setup. And we're just going to let this one rip because this one does take a little bit. Let's see, taking a look at the comments. The demo will be in GitHub at some point. I'll share that after the fact. I'll share that and the deck so everybody can kind of see that, because there are going to be some links and some URLs towards the end that are going to be pretty important. Yep. This one in particular is actually, it also lines up to one of the tutorials that's out there. So like if you're going through terraform.io and click on tutorials, there's one that's specific to this. I literally took that code and put it in my own repo that's here and running that. Anything else? We'll go ahead and confirm our apply operation there. You know, as we were pointing out before, it was detecting that SSH rule was no longer there, so it had to add it back into the mix to fix our drift. So that's now running. And then if we jump back into our Azure environment, we have our applications. So here we can see our Ruddy TFC web app. It's there, it's been created, it's ready to use, or similarly, yeah, there we go. All right, so then once we have all of this information, we're going to want to put that into our Terraform workspace there. So what we have here is, need to switch branches over to where all that configuration comes from. And so what we're doing here is we're using another provider. This is called the TFE provider. This allows us to interact with Terraform Cloud. So instead of me having to type in a bunch of stuff, we're actually going to take the outputs from our prior run. That's what we're calling out right here using the Terraform remote state data source. So we can pull out those outputs without me either having to type them manually or copy paste and doing all sorts of weird manual human error prone type actions. It's going to create some variables within our environment. So these are all detailed in the tutorial. So definitely check out the link that has been provided out there. But the big things here are, a little bit of change that I'll show you in terms of where we're, in terms of the credentials that we're using. All right, so there goes that. And if we jump into our variables screen here, we can see that they've already been created. So what we have here is our subscription ID, our ARM tenant ID, how we're interacting with Azure and the provider itself, and then our client ID for the run itself. Now, before this, we were actually making use of a variable set. So in this case, our variable set, we can use these as kind of groupings of variables that can be applied to workspaces, either granularly or everything across the board. The big thing down here was that there's things like client secrets. And so, not everybody actually wants to share those amongst their organization. Maybe you only have one person that's an administrator. And so this is particularly helpful for those. But again, this is a static credential. So depending upon where you are kind of in your journey of adopting and tracking, making use of credentials, that might not be what you want to use. So we're going to remove this variable set because we're not going to make use of those anymore. We're going to use these environment variables within our configuration now. So jumping back over to our code. So just to verify, to show you what's happening in our main TF for our root module, because this does have some implications for the way that that was being used before. We were referencing our Terraform variables for the subscription ID, client secret, tenant ID. And now because they're environment variables, we no longer have to worry about that. And we also don't have to worry about secrets because that's how Terraform Cloud is talking to Azure AD. So we've commented all those out. So we're ready to roll from that perspective. So let's take a step back and let's do let's run the whole thing. See what our luck looks like here. Jumping back into Terraform Cloud, you can see that our plan has kicked off. So let's see what it looks like in here. Looks like we're all good because it found no changes. So therefore, we changed the authentication method. We're now using that Azure AD application, and it found no changes because we already fixed our drift. And this also has the additional added benefit of those health assessments that I was talking about earlier, is that now, like if you're in an environment where you're using dynamic credentials or you're using point in time credentials, having access to this dynamic set of credentials also allows things like drift detection and continuous validation. So now every single time they run and kick off, they're going to use that dynamic credential to do the checking and the verification instead of you having to go in and update those things before they kick off. So definitely nicer on the dynamic credential side. All right, so from that side, I believe that is our demo. We have a little bit of time, so I will jump into one other area here and show you. Let's see, do we have any? Did I prepare? Yes, I did. All right. So we'll take one really quick second and look at our no code provisioning setup here. So what we have here is a module that is off in our private registry. We can see that it's no code ready, which is basically, in essence, when you take a look at the module itself, is just declaring the provider and the authentication for that configuration. And then the important part is over here on the right-hand side. So provision workspace. It's going to ask us for some variables. I can also define these to be, in either an appropriate set. So I could, say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or I could, let's see, did I set this one up? I did not set this one up with the variable validation, but you can also tell it, hey, we only want for our pet count, we only want that to be integers or numbers, or we only want it to be strings. In this case, we only want the one pet. We want this simplified. We can give it a name, demo, pet. We can assign it to a specific project. Projects is kind of a new structure to look at how you define things within Terraform Cloud. The really nice part about it is the way that you add or assign permissions, just because it allows you to give permissions with a more granular aspect to each of those individual areas. Also allows you to assign variable sets to those. So, think of it from like a development environment. Give your developers access to a particular project. They're always going to use these sets of credentials or this set of resources or this size of virtual machines. You can assign all of those automatically. Super easy from that aspect. We're going to assign it to our demos because that's where our other demo lives. And then we're going to have it auto apply. So from there, we just click create, then it's going to go off and it's going to run. So it reached out to the registry, it created our individual workspace here, and it's actually running through the Terraform workflow itself. So we can see that we have created one singular random pet. And let's see how okay, it didn't get too creative, thankfully. Temp concise links. Yeah, this is a Texas hug, so I feel like maybe that should have been like a steer or maybe cattle, something along those lines, but links, we'll take it. Me personally being a Florida man, alligator would have also been acceptable, but here we are. Okay, so with that, let's jump back into our presentation, because I've already spoiled it that we have one more thing to talk about. There we go. Our one more thing moment. So the other really big thing that's come out with regards to Terraform is the third version of the Terraform Certified Associate exam. So this is one that we've been continually improving the process on when it comes to the certification exams. In this case, it is the updated version for 0.0003 that's out there, and I believe it's been out there for about a month now, I think, something along those lines. So that's a really big thing. There's been a ton of people asking for it. I am excited by the amount of excitement that you all have about it, because super happy to see all of that. All right, additional resources. We have a ton of links. This is going to be very important for me to share the deck. We have the Terraform 1.4 announcement blog. We have release notes. We even have upgrade guides. That was one of the important things when we went to Terraform 1.0 was kind of, how do we approach upgrades? Because we wanted to make it convenient. We wanted to make it easy. We wanted to make the process easier. But we still do the upgrade guides just so that you kind of have a sort of awareness about what's going on. But, underneath the covers, you should be able to go from Terraform 1.0 all the way up to 1.4. You can skip all the intermediate releases. But the one key thing there is that, when you look at things like the Terraform data resource, if you happen to downgrade, that's obviously going to be missing from those earlier versions of Terraform. So, kind of keep that in mind. We have the documentation link to Terraform, to the Terraform data resource. We have everything related to CDKTF. So we have the GA blog from back in August. We've got the 0.15 blog from January-ish. We have the 0.16 blog from just earlier this week. Those also have upgrade guides. Those also have dedicated tutorials for getting started with the cloud development kit and the kind of methodology. Because it is like, if you've used the AWS version, we're literally using the same fundamentals for that. It's just instead of CloudFormation being the underlying engine, this is using Terraform. So it allows you to also use the entire provider ecosystem for that as well, and use those convert commands that I was talking about earlier to ship those off to take your programming language, convert it into HCL. We also have all the links for the Terraform Cloud items, including native OPA support, the dynamic providers GA, the continuous validation beta release, a little bit about projects, and then also no-code provisioning. We have a link to the announcement blog for the Terraform Associate exam, which also comes with its own study guide that kind of works along with that to kind of help follow that along. And then also, lastly, we have two big events that are coming up here really soon. The first one being Hashi Days. This is our European-focused event. It's going to be a single event that's on June 13th. However, when I say single, it's also multi-city. So you're going to have, there's going to be an event in Paris, in London, and in Munich. Then there's also the online component. We always do the online component. So you'll get the keynote, you'll get your Learn Labs or your tutorials and the labs that go along with those. And then all the sessions at the in-person events are going to be recorded and shared after the fact. Personally, I'll be in London, so if you happen to be in the area, definitely stop by. Then we have HashiConf. This is going to be in San Francisco this year. It's going to be October 10th through the 12th. Very excited, looking very much forward to that. It is always a good time. So with that, I see that the chat has blown up. So let me see any other questions we have. We've got some Discord stuff. Definitely a shout out to the HUG leadership group. They're running a great Discord server that's over there. So if you're not a member, sign up. It looks like they're actually hosting an after party on the Discord server. So if you wanna hang around for a little while after the fact, definitely going to be the place to go. They're also going to share the slide deck over there. And then we have a lot of bad jokes about Terraform, how to terraform things. So got a little bit of meme action going on there as well. All right, so with that, I want to thank everyone very much for tuning in. Hopefully this was very educational. Hopefully it gave you, at least something in one of the various areas to look forward to and hopefully to try out as well. The tutorials link that's out there running on HashiCorp or Terraform.io or developer.hashicorp.com, which is the new site where all the tutorials live, are a great resource for all the things that I spoke about today. So again, thank you all very much, and let me turn it over to Wences.
Thank you. Really appreciate you joining us today, and thanks for everything you do and all these resources that you have out there. So all the resources that you have, you want to give me, I can put out there on our Discord, and we can share with guys. And everybody, please join the Discord because, especially this after party, because I got 4 Amazon gift cards I got to give away to somebody. And if you don't go over there, then how am I going to give it to you? So
a good again, problem to have.
So yes, thank you, Mr. Ruddy. Thank you for everything you do and all this good stuff, goodness that you're creating here. And we'll we're going to use the Discord to do some sharing and learning, and some of these things that he has on here that we can walk through. And if people have questions, we have HashiCorp SEs that are available to us that can help us and walk us through. And of course, if there's something special that you need to ask how, we can always pull his ear a little bit and have him come back.
Absolutely, without a doubt.
All right. Well, thanks, guys. Thank you, everybody. And we'll see y'all in the Discord. Have a good one. Thank you.